Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory and you're watching Varietal Literature's YouTube page. If you've never been here before, this is a collection of stuff that a writer likes. On Tuesday nights here we do Fireside Fairytales, which is me reading out classic old folklore and fairy tales, some of which has only very recently been translated from its native language. Pretty much has never been heard in English, or I'll be dealing with some new translations as well. This week is German and Norwegian, but we could do from all over, frankly. But I'm going to do a little introduction in a second. If you are not watching this live, down in the description below, there will be little timestamps that allow you to jump ahead to the beginning of the stories if that's all you want to hear, if you're not too interested in anything else. In terms of what you'd be missing if you jump ahead, I'm going to give a little content warning on the stream because it isn't messing around, some of this folklore. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the translator's notes from last week, which the translator, because we're dealing with some translations from people who currently translate work and live, rather than simply people from the 19th century. They leave me comments on my videos, and I thought I would read some of them aloud, some of the ones that have come up. After that, though, we will get to tonight's theme, which is something you probably don't know, which is the devil and the various devilry activities are associated to, I'm going to say Christmas Eve. Some are literally Christmas Eve, but you'll see that some are related to what are called the 12 Days of Christmas, and I will get to what that is when we get there. You've heard the song, I'm sure, but you might not actually know what the source of that is. Spoiler alert, it has nothing to do with Christmas. It has everything to do with the same period of time, though, but it does not have its roots in Christ, which is what Christmas means, Christmas. So that's what we're going to do. So if you want to jump ahead, get to those timestamps, click them on. You can go and listen to the stories. We're going to be doing a few stories. Some are very short, little nuggets of folklore, real folklore. And then we're going to end with a very long one that is a bit of an unusual structuring for a folktale. But it's stories within stories. So it seems like a long one, but it's several tales about the devil making trouble in the winter. And we'll deal with that when we get there, which is a Norwegian tale. So, content warning. This is about the devil. And, well, in modern conceptions, the devil's like a hoity-toity, oh, that little rascal, sort of almost a trickster spirit, or like a representation of freedom, and maybe kind of handsome and alluring, and a little bit, morally gray or whatever. Like, that's kind of the popular conception of him. In the era of folklore that we're reading, the devil was the source of all evil. All horrible things that people did, all madness. So without going into any specifics, because that would ultimately spoil it for a lot of people, what's coming, I just want to let you know this isn't really stories for kids. This does address real world awful things that people do in the context of the devil sort of making them do it. It's real folklore, which was stories shared by adults to other adults. We're not talking about fairy tales here. So that's your content warning. Viewer discretion, as they say. Your choice on what you're willing to risk if you have triggers such as that. Which means, without wasting any more time, let's talk about... I was going to do a music sting here, but dun-da-da, translator's notes. That's the kind of quality that you can expect going forward. So I'm going to read a comment on our last video, which was about ghosts at Christmas time, ghost stories from Christmas time. And within it, I told literal ghost stories, but I also told some stories about spirits that, you could conceive either as spirits, or you might think of them as ghosts or something on that bridge of reality, somewhere where the borders get fuzzy. That came from a tale that was translated by Jürgen Hubert. And he left a comment on that video that I'm going to read back now, because I'm sure you don't want to click back and look at them. Just so we know that it's not me saying this, let's keep this up. I'm glad that you picked the Lake Maidens, which was the name of the tale, as one of your tales for this, because it features the spinning chamber, which is an extremely important to understand winter storytelling in Germany. This was not merely a local thing. Similar events took place all over German-speaking lands in the wintertime. Where I live, in Oldenburg, the sun currently rises at 8:25 a.m. and goes down at 16:10 or 4:10 p.m. So that's less than 8 hours of daylight time for outside work. And in pre-industrial times, artificial lighting was expensive, so most people gathered in the main chamber by the hearth fire. Women would spin flax. I'll talk about that because that's going to come up tonight. And there is a lot of superstition and folklore surrounding that activity. And everyone would entertain themselves by swapping gossip, singing songs, and, of course, telling stories. Winter is the prime storytelling season. In other words, in spring, summer, and fall, people would often be hard at work outside to have much time for storytelling sessions. But in winter, everyone was sitting together by the fire, and thanks to the gloom outside, telling scary stories around this time of the year would be natural. You don't even need the dangers of winter to inspire you. Although, I think it's worth adding, winter was quite dangerous. So that's our translator's notes from last week's show, which did quite well. If you have joined up with the channel from that show, you should know that I have tons of other pieces of ghost folklore that I intend to get to, but they just aren't seasonally appropriate right now. We're sort of in our winter mode, our winter solstice mode. Yeah, so with all of that said, we do read tales here, so we should get to that. I see GS is here. GS says, good evening. This is going to be an eye-opener. I hope so. But, we'll see. Okay, which means it's time to turn down the fire, as they say on this channel. By they, I mean me. And get our contextual sound going. Turn down the music a bit too. So, our first story is a very short little story about the devil during the 12 nights of Christmas. It makes a reference to spinning flax, which is a sort of fiber you get from flax that, flax stalks, not the seeds, obviously, that you would spin into stuff that you would weave into clothes. And the way you would do that is you would have a, basically stick a spool of it, and you'd have a wheel that would twist it into thread. I think it's a little important to understand that there is a spinning wheel here for this story to really make much sense. So, our first story comes from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, which is, again, if you check the description, a recent translation of German folklore by Jürgen. And our first story is called In the 12 Nights of Christmas, and the Devil in the 12 Nights of Christmas. And that's where we'll begin. In the 12 nights of Christmas, people avoid spinning or leaving flax on the distaff, which is the stick that you feed into the wheel. Or else the woad, madness, will race right through it. One woman wanted to attempt it anyways, and so sat down and spun flax. Immediately, her farm hands fell into a heavy slumber, from which they could not be roused, and soon the door opened, and a man entered, demanded the spinning wheel, and started to spin. The woman could do nothing else but to throw all the flax she had to him. Soon everything was spun, reeled, and wrapped, and the devil constantly demanded more. Now the woman fetched all the tow fiber she had in the house, and soon after that her wool. But this was spun just as fast, and when it was 4 o'clock in the morning, still a long time until the daybreak, in her fear she ran to her neighbor, who was an old wise woman, and probably had already noticed what was happening in her house. For her neighbor met her halfway, and subsequently freed her and made her happy. If the devil had spun all the material, and if the woman hadn't given him enough to do, it would have cost her her life. Now, that is our first tale, and I know what you're thinking. What just happened? As it says in the beginning of the tale, people either avoided spinning or leaving flax on the distaff, otherwise madness will race through it. And it seems to be implied that if somehow she wasn't able to keep it spinning all night, the devil would have a right to her life. It's a superstition. If you're digging for a reason, it's probably not there. It's just a superstition. So that's our first story of the devil and the 12 Nights of Christmas. Now, I'd mentioned that 12 Nights of Christmas doesn't really have anything to do with Christmas, and it doesn't. The 12 Nights of Christmas is basically set up around the time when winter solstice was believed to happen. They were off by a little bit, by the way. The 25th is not really the winter solstice, but it is when the Romans originally sort of labeled it as the solstice. And for those who don't know, the solstice is the point at which the days stop getting shorter. So it marks sort of the turning point in winter. Around that time, 12 days of celebration would occur that would stretch all the way into what we would call New Year's, from the 25th to whatever 12 days after the 25th is, I guess January 6th or something. 5th? 6th? But it has its roots in Nordic myth, as well as actually Roman Saturnalia as well. But it was 12 days of feasting done in the name of Odin and Thor. So, but it, of course, during the Christianization of Europe, and in this case Germany, those things become Christian, right? Whether they have any particular reason to be 12 days of Christmas around Christianity didn't really matter. It's because people already celebrated with 12 days of feasting and rituals and stuff around that time. And so for that reason, some things are specific references to Christmas Eve, but some are sort of references to that time, to this 12 days of Christmas. And our first one was that. Our next one, though, is called The Devil in the Confessional at Oschatz. And this is specifically about Christmas Eve and the devil. And it is an interesting take, I think. This is The Devil in the Confessional at Oschatz, another traditional folklore collected and then translated in the book Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles. One day a monk took a seat in the confessional at the monastery church, which is located beyond the cloisters in a chamber where the people wanted to confess gathered. Then the devil appeared in the confessional and admitted to so many major sins which he had either committed or helped commit that the monk declared it to be impossible that one person could have done all this. Now the devil revealed to the monk who he was. The monk questioned why he was confessing at all, since he ought to know that he could find no grace with God, but Satan replied that all who had done the rite of confession before him had looked just as black and ugly as he did, and after they had received absolution, they had become beautiful and white. For this reason he had come here as well, so that he could become like them, but the monk refused absolution to him, whereupon the devil rose up in the air and took the roof of the confessional with him. In memory of this incident, a placard portraying it was hung up at the site where it allegedly occurred. On it, the following words were written, and it's Latin for a date. Also a similar tale, which allegedly happened to a priest named Laurentius Donner during Christmas Eve of the year 1534 in a city in Saxony, is told by Hundorf. I won't steal the translator's commentary. I don't really read the translator's commentaries because if you want those, that is pretty literally their property, and you can go and support them on Patreon for a couple of bucks and get your own copy of Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, where you can read all this commentary. But the commentary is academic work done in the modern time, so it's not really my place to be taking it. But I will say this. There is this interesting trend, this isn't the only one, but this is the only one at Christmas Eve, of the devil seeking absolution, but doing so in the wrong way, and therefore having it denied to them. All right. Now the next one is an interesting one if you watched the show 2 weeks ago. If you watched the show about second here. There we go. If you watch the show where it was called It's Not Christmas Until Odin Raids the Countryside, which is about the Wild Hunt, which is a motif that occurs across several, sorry, still windy outside there, which is a motif that occurs across several folklore and cultural centers. But we were connecting it to Santa Claus because it's very Santa Claus. But it generally takes place around the 12 days of Christmas. And we are going to read a story that obviously has taken some of the ideas that we talked about there and applied it in a different way. It's not a direct comparison, but there's obvious comparisons here. This one is called The Woe Mother, and it is about more so exorcism. So this is The Woe Mother, a translation of a short piece of folklore in Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles. Near the end of the previous century, the Woe Mother lived in Augsburg. She was a midwife, and during emergency baptisms, she baptized the child in the name of the devil. After her death, she returned as a haunt in various forms, such as a dog, a calf, and similar beings. She was a dreadful menace. She became a threat to women in childbed and small children in particular. She made her presence known to them through pitiful whining. During the 12 nights of Christmas, she traveled through the streets, and people who cheekily looked out their windows would pay for it with swollen heads. There was no peace until a priest banished her into the Danube, near Regensburg. Others claim that a Capuchin monk had banished the Woe Mother into the Vertak River. Now, if you'll remember, when we were talking, there's a couple of references here. the idea of keeping all your doors closed and stuff during Christmas or the 12 nights of Christmas was a referenced in some of the idea that some of Frau Gauden, who was a wild huntswoman, and her daughters who had been turned to dogs, and a dog would get in your house and it would make all this noise, but if you didn't hurt it, you would get good things. You can see that there's a bit of that in here, except this one is more decidedly evil. Okay, so you can start to see and not peeking, says GS. Yeah. So you can see that there's this kind of there's this trend in to see the nights around the 12 nights of Christmas is not a welcoming and joyous occasion, as a time of like where the most menacing devilry occurs, including the devil himself. And so with that context established, I want to read us the main story we're going to read tonight. And the main story we're going to read tonight is called The Plank Drivers. Now, this does require some context. So if you're the kind of person who says, I do not care about context, remember there will be timestamps down below. You can jump ahead to the beginning of the story. This is a story by a famous translator collector of Norwegian folklore, who we have read translations of on this channel before. They are older translations, but we have read translations from them before, of their collections before. And their name is, I'll just show it. Peter Christen Asbjørnsen. There it is. And Jørgen Engebretsen Mo? Jørgen Mo. They are sort of the Grimm brothers of Norwegian folklore, if you need kind of a context. They are major collectors of tales from the lands around. And what's different about this story is it's not itself a presentation of chunks of folklore. What it is Peter, in this case, writing a tale in his modern time, which gives us an interesting context, by the way, where within the tale he's going to couch about 4 or 5 different tales about the devil in winter. It's on the longer side that we read. It will probably take the rest of the hour, if not a little bit longer. The first bit of it is establishing sort of context of what Norway was like during sort of the early 19th century, which is, to me, fascinating. But I do understand that if you came to this channel just purely for folklore, this might not be your favorite thing. So if it's not for you, it's not for you. It's not really the kind of thing we normally read here, but it itself is a story that would fit as a piece of folklore, told in a bit more of a modern style. But within it is classic folklore, real folklore, that Asbjørnsen has collected. Now, first and foremost, the story does a good job explaining itself. But the plank drivers are basically old school logging trucks. Except, of course, they didn't have combustion engines. At least, I don't think they had them at all, but maybe there was some version of them, but they weren't on wagons. So obviously they're horse-drawn, and he does a good job of establishing sort of their menace on the roads. But this is set in sort of a logging capital of Norway, and that he knew very well. And I would encourage you to just sort of absorb the detail of a time I didn't know. and I'm sure you don't either. And then when you're sort of in that place where you're like, oh, this is just a story, then the folklore starts to butt its head up, and the story gets stranger and stranger and stranger. So this story is from The Complete Norwegian Folk Tales and Legends of Asbjørnsen and Mo, which is translated by, it's been translated by others, but this has been translated by Simon Roy Hughes, who has, down in the description you can see it, a Patreon and a blog. The blog will show you many more stories of his translations. It's incredibly fun to read. But if you go to the Patreon and you pay the couple of bucks for it, not only will you be supporting his work of coming up with a refined translation of the works, you will also get the edited with art and everything, really beautiful versions of the stories, which I'm going to show you an example of one here. So this is The Plank Drivers by Peter Christen Asbjørnsen. Also, it has an enormous amount of Norwegian words, which I have a translation guide for, but just be aware, this is not my native language, and it will show. Adjust the volume a little bit here. There we go. This is The Plank Drivers, originally written in Norwegian by Peter Christen Asbjørnsen and translated by Simon Roy Hughes, whose information is in the description below. If you travel of a winter through some of the villages in our country, Norway, that have a lively trade in lumber, you can hardly avoid bumping into plank and board drivers. They make no pleasurable acquaintance. The ruts they carve and cut out in the roads with their reckless driving and heavy loads would be unfortunate enough. They cause both rolling and rocking, but that is nothing compared to the meeting the timber road tyrants themselves when they block the traffic in columns of 30, 40, or 50 loads. There's a picture of them driving. The rights and well-beings of travelers don't seem to concern them. The plank drivers any more than the plank that hasn't yet been cut, or the brandy that hasn't yet been distilled. He'll take a rest in the middle of the road, blocking it for as long as he wants. Traveling folk may have the banks of snow along the roadside if they dare not claim a little of the half of the road they are legally entitled to. But don't offer the plank driver harsh words at such a juncture. He's just as ready with his fist as he's inclined to peace and reason when he's offered a little brandy. And that's the way things must be. Brandy is both food and drink and clothing for him through his exhausting and unpleasant life. This way of life and its endless drinking naturally makes them wholly animal. The plank drivers are the outcasts of the villages that are deprived on account of their proximity to the city. They are bandits from the district. They learn their peculiar lifestyle from the mischievous wandering packs in the dens and resting places. Together with the rabble from the town, lime boys and butcher boys, that's lime is in the mineral, not the fruit. Dandies, just a second. Dandies at the Triumphrude ballroom and similar dancing booths are the unattainable role models for the speech, manners, and lifestyle of the younger generation of the plank-driving families. The plank driver seeks his literary diet in the 2-shilling ballads sold by basket women on corners and beneath stairs, which sing of murder and killing, burglary, and other frightful episodes. And yet, it may be in the cold moonlit night, when the plank driver travels to town with his load, that you can hear a clear, primal melody, reminiscent of the country in its intense fragrance. When he travels home again, however, with empty ropes, his song resembles the bellow of the wild beasts, enjoying the raw noise it makes. And the fear and loathing they instill. The long queues fill the air with whoops and screams, goading their horses, which furiously race on their way in herds and companies. The sledges careen here and there, the white marks, chalk marks, and numbers on hats and great coats are wiped out every time one of them overturns in the banks of snow, and at any moment an unreined horse may suddenly tilt out of the road and turn into a farm or a cabin where there is brandy to be had. For they know the watering holes as well as their masters do, from long habit. Even before he arrives, the traveler may notice the presence of these sheds and shacks due to the deeply plowed, powdered snow in the road. We wanted once to visit one of these places. At Borarbecken, horse stands by horse before as many loads of planks or empty sledges idling or chewing on a spot of dry hay that the sheep and goats that belong to the house fraternally share with them. The Douleur, or valley dwellers, or mountain farmers who rest here with their secured loads, sit around a red and blue painted food box, partaking of their food together beneath the open sky, bringing a little variation into the monotony. With their painterly outfits and distinctive forms and faces, some driver or other, busy watering his horse in the brook, presses himself through the multitude of sleds and horses, which he scolds and grinds his teeth at. Others appear only on the gallery, or stick their heads out through the cabin door to glare at their foul, four-legged companions. Inside, there are multitudes of drivers, sober and drunk. Some of the latter flock together around the bar, which is nothing but a large cabinet in one corner of the long, low parlor. A tall, dry woman stands, pouring a blue-white, fragrant fusillon from a siphon bottle into a half-pint measure, which is a brown-black from long, constant use. In the other corner stands a box-shaped stove in which blazes and blows a fire, the heat of which produces stinking steam from damp snow socks and great coats on the fellows who sit or lie on the benches, resting by the stove. Along the table that stands in the third corner under the only window in the parlor, there are various activities. Some sit, emptying half pint after half pint, without uttering a word. Others drink and talk about plank inspectors and plank bundles, of horse strangles and wholesalers, of backboards and throttles, of the horses, of Blocken and, Borka. And yet others play cards. And a note here, horse strangles is a sort of respiratory disease that would eventually kill a horse through suffocation. "My father," said a driver fellow who was still only tipsy, still happy, very talkative and loud. "My father sold Blocken to the big Hollander up at the end of the table, the one playing cards. He should have him for $20 if he was able to lift him. And the devil salt my life if the fellow didn't put his back beneath his belly and lift him like a mitten. He did. He was a fine figure of a fellow. He was, yet he still is, as you can see yourself. But by then, it was over for old Blocken. God bless me when he was young, the nag, that is. He'd never drawn a load of planks and stromsvies and rode, but when he put his legs... When he put his legs on the ground, devil salt me if he didn't stand as if he were made of stone. Perhaps you don't believe it, my boy. You can do as you please, but even if the ground was so bad that the snow had been worn down to bare stone, then he would still draw the plank flowed forward. Yes, he had one hell of a temperament, that nag, but it was all over for him by the time the old man sold him. Strangles took him all the time. His chest sounded like an empty brandy barrel. He had arthritis. You see, his hind legs were stiff as a rippling comb. Well, don't you think Borka did the same? Replied a small, fat one who no longer sat so steadily on the bench and occasionally swatted at the air after imaginary flies. She drove her 3 dozen, and perhaps more when she felt like it. The devil shoot me if she didn't go like a bride. Before the load of planks anyways. What a mare! You'll never see her like. She had fine common sense. If it isn't true, then let the Lord never let me drink another dram in my life. Even if I was drunk as a jackdaw and screamed and howled worse than a grey shanks, for you know I must have a dram when I need one. Then blow me if she didn't go faster for it. She went into where we should take rest too, if she wasn't given her feed. Then she would find herself amongst what there was to find, and even if I could not see so much as a straw of hay, there's not such a mare in all the kingdoms of the world. Not even Meyer owns her like. God, no, he doesn't. Meyer was apparently a famous horse owner and racer. These men continued in the same vein, talking about their horses so passionately that they were close to weeping at times. And if one didn't properly appreciate the outstanding virtues of another's horse, they would turn on one another. Nearby sat a garrison fellow on leave who was traveling home for Christmas. He seemed to come from the same village and was as good acquaintance of the two who sat playing cards up at the end of the table. He did his best to maintain the peace and agreement, in order to seem more insistent to that end, and because he wanted a dram himself, he called on the daughter of the house, who had relieved her mother at the bar, and asked her to bring some brandy. But she was besieged by a group of fellows who were moving on, drinking farewell, and she didn't hear him. "Maiden! Maiden!" he shouted once more, and once again. "Let's have half a pint of akavit." "We make such maidens from flooring backboards," the half-drunk driver who had held the memorial speech to Borka said, laughing lecherously from across the partition of the gunner. A footnote, backboards were, well, I'm just going to read the note from the translator. A backboard or back is the first plank sawn from a log, and it still has the bark on one side. Because of their limited utility, these boards are cheap. So he's calling her cheap. "She's a doll for you anyway," said he who held with Blocken. He got up and walked towards the girl who'd finally come towards him with the brandy. Stamping on the floor with his feet, he sang falsely, making all sorts of suggestive and unwelcome gesticulations towards her and slurring her words. "Oh, next Saturday evening, then I'll come to you, and I'll have a second with me. Oh, let me now see that you look after yourself to keep yourself lusty," said she. "Leave my goddaughter in peace," said the above-mentioned Hollander, who sat between the card players. "God preserve me, Buskarud. Don't take it so hard. Just having a little fun," said the plank driver, grinning, continuing his appreciation in such a way that she, whom he celebrated, had to repeatedly refuse him, though it did little good. Eventually, the Hollander rose during a break in the card game, grabbed him with one hand, and sat him down on a chair so that it broke beneath him. "Calm yourself down, or you'll answer to me," he said emphatically. "A red devil deal with him. Even so, I put some equally good fellows on their back, and better," the driver muttered between his teeth as the Hollander turned his back. This Hollander, who commanded such respect and who behaved with such gravity, was a tall man with a large nose, a sharp look, and all in all a very weighty appearance. He was playing cards with three plank drivers with rather silly, yet what one would call farmer-like faces. It was clear that they had surrounded him, for he seemed to be a person of importance in comparison to the rest of the shabby company, in order to properly hustle him. In the manner of the plank drivers, they held the thick, dirty, crumpled, and worn cards curled up in their hands, strongly gnarled hands, but they still looked at each other's and the Hollander's cards, made faces, and trod on each other's feet. They didn't say much while they were playing, just cast the cards on the table now and then with a short word, since the game required it. "You deal. Labala, base, spell it. Put the money down. Come on, or get out of the game." A peal of laughter, or a thundering curse, foretold how their luck had turned. Pardon me, just taking a drink of water. The Hollander had lost to begin with, but when he was away to do his goddaughter a good turn, he noticed that the others were putting their heads together and cheating with the cards. From then on, he took better notice without letting on. He was lucky and had good cards in his hand. He was a better player than the others, too. It wasn't long, therefore, before he had cleaned all three out. "How in the hell does this hang together?" exclaimed one of the players, looking suspiciously at the Hollander as he swept the last of the money towards himself. If I haven't won one hand, then the card maker is a crook. I think the devil himself is in the cards, I do.
Perhaps you don't think I'm playing fairly either, asked the Hollander,
standing up threateningly to his full, impressive height.
I don't think otherwise,
replied the plank driver. But is it completely unintentional? Here I've sat with good cards, one hand after the other, without winning once. Didn't I have both the trump in the game last time? What was the best?
What was the best?
The Hollander asked. Just as a note, if you're like, what the hell is this card game? It doesn't matter that you know what this card game is. It seems to be an old game that isn't really played anymore. And it seems to indicate everything you need to know. It's got calling out these words has something to do with the betting cycle of it.
The ace of spades, I know, replied the first.
How the hell do you have the ace of spades? Replied one of the others, who was now a little drunk. Didn't you see that the ace of spades fell to the floor? It was so spoiled. Yeah, it couldn't be used.
Stuff and nonsense. I had the best. You saw I had half trump marvelous. I sat with the queen of spades in my hand and the king was lying in the stock, and then I took the base up top, so I had to win, I would think.
No, the devil scratched me if you won, replied the driver. You needed 3 points, didn't you? How could you have won then?
Go to hell, you dog, cried the Hollander bitterly. Did I need 3 points, Christen?
He asked the third of the players who'd been sitting silently through the exchange, gazing at the others with eyes dulled from the brandy.
Yes, by God, you did, said this one.
Yes, and the devil strike the one who remembers. But the strangest thing was that Anders, who had apparently had such good cards, didn't win. Perhaps you spilled your brandy over your points or rubbed them out the wrong way, he added threateningly. Then he added,
Oh, brandy, our comforter true, la 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 la. We use you well we can so, la 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 la.
He continued his crooning.
Shut up, you drunken dog, shouted the Hollander. Did you perhaps think you'd win the last hand too?
He asked the driver who had first begun to argue.
Yes, God, if I didn't think so. Who the devil? No, you were going to discard the diamonds and keep the queen of spades. As many spades has already been played.
It comes of my being able to play, you see, teased the Hollander superciliously.
I have. The devil scratched me played cards before today. I have, you know, you pig's nose, said the driver angrily. But when the devil is out, then he's out. Whether he come from hell or from the Hadland.
The devil, said the gunner who sat down with the company. The devil. I didn't know he'd been out after last year. He was out on Christmas Eve, I heard. What do you say? Said the driver who had spoken last and was happy for the diversion from the brewing storm that showed on the face of the Hollander after the unpleasant words. Was he about on Christmas Eve? How'd things go then? Ended with him traveling northwards. But how is it he should travel northwards then? Asked the plank driver eagerly. Well, if my throat weren't so dry, I'd tell you, said the gunner, coughing. But I'm so full of phlegm and the cold I can barely open my mouth. Have a dram, my boy, you'll not catch the strangles, said the plank driver, pouring a glass from the half pint the Hollander had ordered for the comfort and consolation of the players he had just fleeced.
Do you have arthritis? Your hind legs are as stiff as a stall wall, he said, as a soldier who appeared to have been drinking all day tried with some difficulty to get up. Look, here's your dram, and it is well measured. So take the bet between your teeth and let your mouth trot. Thanks for the bidding, said the soldier. Merry Christmas. All the way to Easter. Cheers. Takes a lot of pepper to fill a mare, said the plank driver with a laugh as he watched the gunner drain half the pint. But let us now hear what it was all about with the devil. Yeah, certainly, I'll tell you. It happened that there was a gunner who'd been granted leave and was traveling home for Christmas, just as I do now, you see. He set out on the morning of Christmas Eve, but when he got to Lakagata and was about to take that road, then he met some friends. They knew that he had some money, for he was on the road, and so they wanted to drink to his good journey. And he wasn't the kind who said no, for he was glad to take a dram for any reason. Then he went into a cooper's, and there he sat drinking all day long. He wanted to set off many times, for he had to go all the way to Sulur, you see, and he thought it might be time to leave. And if he wanted to reach all the way thither before the 3rd day of Christmas, but they didn't let him go before 6 o'clock, and he had no more money than 3 marks and 19 shillings left. So then he began to shuffle along. But it was slow going because of the conditions. He walked and stomped and stamped in the loose snow. He was drunk too, you see, but even so he was still able to stay on his feet. And however it was or wasn't, he managed to pull himself up the hill of Sinsenbakken. Someone then came up behind him, driving up. A heavy man in a broad sleigh, with a big, stout, black horse before him. "Where are you going?" asked the man. "I," he replied. "I'm going to Sulur, father." "That's where I'm going this evening, and that this evening," said the man. "Are you going there this evening? You'll be driving swiftly then. The others take a couple of days. More than that if they're using their horses." "Oh yes, but I have my own special fresh horse, I do," said the man. "Get in. You'll have a free ride, and a fresh ride, too," he said. "Indeed!" He thanked him and got in. And then they rushed off so that he had enough to do to keep his eyes open. They didn't make the road long, these fellows. As evening fell, the man said, "Now you are home." And when the gunner managed to open his eyes properly and look around, he saw that he was outside his father's farm, and he thanked him for the ride, as well as he had learned. Now when they should part company, he asked, "Where are you going, then?" "Who, I?" said the man. "I am going to the neighboring farm here, to hold my hand over the back of a girl." "Well," said the gunner, "are you really?" He didn't think about it much, for his head was still heavy, both from the drink and the journey, and when he came into the cabin, the clock struck 9, which was the very moment they should sit down at the table and begin eating their Christmas porridge. I'm going to remind you, there was a content warning on this stream. This is your last chance to jump out. The next day, he told of the fresh ride he'd had and repeated what the man had said when they parted company, that he was going to the neighboring farm to hold his hand over the back of a girl.
and they wondered what manner of fellow this could be, and thought it most likely to be a prankster from among the lumber merchants or the petty bailiffs who fly about the villages up there. But just as they sat thinking about it, they came in mind of a girl at the neighboring farm who was with child. And immediately someone came in and told that the milkmaid had delivered a baby that night, and she had killed it with an axe and laid it in the pig trough. And then they realized what manner of fellow it was who had traveled northwards. It was the devil himself.
Hi! This was a foul episode. I wouldn't have driven with him, said the driver, who'd been so eager to get the soldier to tell. How did they get the devil out again?
The hell I know, replied the gunner. I haven't heard other than that. He went straight to hell again when he was done.
Yes, but he is usually difficult to get out again. Many a parson has a difficulty dealing with him when he really holds fast, the blank driver continued. I can imagine, said another. When the village has a lowly parson living among them, then the devil must likely does what he wants. Now it must be a real fellow, he who commands the devil but cannot be fed with chopped juniper and backboards, nor go in rags and nonsense. He has to understand his black book as well as the catechism and then some.
That is very true, Anders Smestabakken, said the gunner. I've heard tell of a person who was the fellow for it. He was the parson at... I'm just going to tell you, this is an approximation of a word that I could not figure out quite how to wrap my English tongue around. English-speaking tongue. I reckon, at the time. He had a black book, and he could read just as well forwards as backwards. And he could both loose and bind at once. God save us, what a man he was, both to lose and to conjure the devil. He was with them at Tonyin once, my uncle, when he was nearly fully grown. It was a Sunday evening, and the devil was playing a terrible game with someone, most likely a merchant, I should think. There'd been a tumult there, both with parsons and others who had tried as best as they could, but there was nothing to be done. The devil was getting worse and worse every day. Then at length they sent for the parson at Reykjavik. It was a little late in the autumn, in the worst of the autumn rain. Well, he drove to Gulo in Lear and crossed Dromensfjord in Tanyen on the Sunday evening, and my uncle was with him. And he had hardly come inside before every single gap in the wall began to whine and whistle. The parson from Reykjavik said, "It doesn't help that you whistle. You'll have to leave." And no sooner had he said it than the devil went up through the chimney pipe like a black smoke. There were many people who saw it. Then it fell calm again, you see. The parson crossed the fjord and again drove homewards. But when he had come a little way up the cliff, in Gulo Clever, it grew dark, and so they drove. My uncle was still with them, and then the wagon axle broke in two places so that the wheel rolled down the cleft.
"Ho, ho! If you are such a fellow," said the parson from Reykjavik, "then you shall damn well have something to carry. Sit tight, Per, and hold fast," he said to my uncle. And then you may imagine how they went. No man has ever travelled so quickly to Bakken from Greeny.
And my uncle said he would happily go to court and die on the fact that they went more through the weather like an arrow than they had kept on the road. And when they kept to the ground a little, the mud sprayed and sparks flew about their ears, so they looked worse than the devil himself when they arrived at the parsonage. "Now thank you for the ride, my boys," said the parson from Riken. You can imagine whom he said that to. "Now go for my wagon wheels and guya, clever. And weld together the shaft you broke to pieces, and we may be quits this time," he said. And my uncle had not even removed a shaft pin before the wagon axle that they had traveled with was with him. Both the horse and wagon smelled of sulfur for 3 weeks afterwards. And then afterwards there was the time my uncle was in service in Huseby, in Lear. Pardon me, water. The devil made such a racket there at Olga Sun Docker in Sturvala that they had barely any peace for even one night or day. This Olga Sandaker had sold his soul to him, or I've heard. He was certain that there wasn't a body so mean for many miles. They said the devil helped him with everything, and he quarreled with the whole village. But then one night when my uncle came driving with a load of planks from Svenstrand, and when he came past Sturvala, then he heard that there were people inside. They were banging on the table and disagreeing with each other. He stopped and let the horse rest for a little fun, for he thought the devil might be a fight. But then suddenly he clearly saw that the devil stood with his legs in the skylight, bent down to the parlor window, and he was so long that he had to bend over until he stood crooked like a fiddle bow. And just like that, he began to hammer on the window frame, and my uncle fell aghast, for it was just like a peal and crash of thunder. And my uncle fled and drove all he could. And then there was another time they were playing cards there, and swearing and cursing. It went very badly with the others, but Sandaker won the whole hand, one after the other, and he played them mostly for spite. Suddenly a card fell to the floor, and he who had lost it bent down to pick it up, and he saw that the devil sat under the table, helping Sandaker. He clasped his claws around the table leg, so they sent for the parson from Riken, and he came on the hour, for he was not slow to leave when he should conjure. He lit 2 church candles and put them on the table, and he had hardly begun to recite before the devil released the table leg and threw the card game at the parson, so angry he was.
"Do you think of casting me out, Christian Block Cossack?"
said the devil.
"You're a thieving knave, for you have stolen a ball of thread and a crust of bread."
I took the ball of thread to fix my cassock, and the crust of bread to sate my hunger, the parson replied, conjuring again. But the devil didn't want to leave. Then the parson began to conjure and conjure, so that the devil began to creak and crack, for it broke over him too hard.
"May I go through the chimney?"
said the devil. "No," replied the parson, for if he'd been allowed to do so, he would have taken the roof with him, perhaps.
"May I go through the chimney?"
said the devil. "No," replied the parson. "No, you shall not. You shall go out here, my man," said the parson, and he drilled a small hole in the window lid with a darning needle. Needle's an English word I shouldn't be able to pronounce. And that's where he had to go out. No matter whether he whistled or sang, out he had to go. Then things were quiet for a while, but when the time approached for Oga to die, the devil began to make trouble again in Lear, and that both Stur Lear and where elsewhere. And at that time there was a girl at a place below Linnes, who had a bastard. One Sunday evening, as he stood on the bridge at Viker, gazing and staring down into the water, he came to her like a big black dog and licked her hand. And with that, she threw the child into the river. And at Sturvala, he grew desperately mad. And that wasn't to be wondered at, for he waited there year after year for Oga's life to be extinguished. But Oga lived just as well as he did. And then in the end, people began to think perhaps he had cheated the devil too. Yes, he was certainly a fellow, was that Oga. But no one has seen an uglier man. Well, they didn't know what to do, other than send for the parson from Reykjavik again. When he'd come in, he said good evening, and then he went to sit on a chair. But at the same time, someone came and snatched away the chair, and the whole parson fell to the floor. "Bring me an empty brandy butt, mother," said the parson. For he was now angry, and when he got the butt, he began to conjure until everyone in the cabin was affected, and at its zenith, the devil came in through the keyhole, crawling and whistling and waggling his tail like a little dog, crossed the floor to the parson from Reykjavik. Down into the brandy butt he had to go, and when he was in, the parson knocked in a cork and then said, "Now shall you mad devil, be my pig!" After that time, no one has met the devil in Sturvala. "That was a powerful parson," said one of the drivers. "Yes, but even so, the parson from Akka was better," said another, "for the devil was so scared when he saw him that he began to trot off right away. Wasn't far away this happened, I don't think. There are 4 marks from his claw here in the tabletop here, where this Hollander farmer holds his fist." "What are you saying?" asked the gunner eagerly, glaring at the tabletop. "If the devil has been here, I'd never heard tell. You must tell us, since we're talking him anyways." "Well," replied the driver, "the folk of the house have gone out, I see. For one shouldn't talk about ropes and knitting in a hangman's house, as the proverb says. It happened such that some drivers sat there playing cards, drinking a half pint once in a while when they needed it, and then some, perhaps. Whether the man of the house was in or not, I cannot tell for certain, but I believe he went back and forth between the brandy cabinet and the card game. But then someone wearing mittens came in. First he sat watching a little, then looked at the cards. Then he played a hand with them and drank with them. He did too." But no matter how he played or what he did, he had his mittens on. And they should have some food, because they have mostly been on brandy all evening. "But in Jesus' name, you eat with the mittens on too, do you?" said one of them, because they were now a little angry that he'd won over them so badly. And then suddenly the devil struck his fist on the table so that his claws passed through, and then they understood what manner of fellow they were together with.
And so they sent the parson from Aker. And when he came, the devil had to leave, for he thought the parson was much uglier than he was himself. Move your fingers so we can see the mark in the tabletop, said one of the drivers who'd played cards with the Hollander, nudging his arm. A threatening cloud fell across Hollander's face, but he calmly moved his hand. Did you take away the mark, too? Anders said it was under your fist. Ho ho! Let's see your claws, he said with a nasty grin, reaching for Hollander's hands. One of the others grabbed the candle and began to look for his feet beneath the table, but then the Hollander got up and struck the middle of the tabletop with his fist so that it cracked from one end to the other with a mighty stroke. Yes, you shall see my hooves, and you shall feel them too, you fools, he cried as he held his broad-knuckled fist up beneath their eyes. Out! Out the door! You should not be inside with folk, you mare flares. Out, I say, he commanded, snatching the door wide open. Oh, my window stopped. Do you think we're afraid of you then, big fellow? One of them cried. No, not if you had claws to reach from here to Galveston, either. Now here's the boy for you. Here's a healthy rascal, he continued, grabbing the Hollander by his nose. The Hollander answered not a word. He just grabbed the fellow by his neck and sent him headlong out into the yard. Pardon me. The gunner took sides with the plank drivers, and as they rushed the Hollander, he stole behind him, grabbed his shoulders, and put his knee against their back and tried to break him over the floor. But when their victim noticed this trick, he gathered all his extraordinary strength and moved his right foot forward, bent his back, and grabbed behind himself, grasping hold of his legs, and he threw him with a sudden twist of his upper body over his head and out through the door. The other two he grabbed by the throat, one in each hand, and threw them backwards out after their comrades. During this commotion, the kitchen door was opened, and the wife of the house, her daughter, and a couple of other womenfolk looked in, frightened but curious. "You're cleaning the parlor, are you?" said the wife. "I had to," replied the Hollander. When you get no peace from the horsefly, you have to swat it away. "Well, I'll swat you, whether you're the devil himself or his mother," said one of the ejected drivers, who came in again with the hunter, with the gunner. Blood on his face, he tried to drive the Hollander with a broken lashing rod. But the Hollander turned neatly away from the stroke and slammed the door and tore the rod from the driver's hand. "You are certainly a tough fella, but now we're going to try your skull," said the Hollander, taking the fellow by his shoulder and pushing him towards the door with such force that he went out with a roar as the door splintered to many pieces. "I do believe it's the devil himself. When I wrestled with him, it was as if I wrestled with a sauna wall," said the gunner as he took to his legs out through the kitchen. And that is the plank drivers. As you can see, it's a more like
actual story rather than simply collected folklore. But within it are all these tales of local legends about the devil and so on. Gia says the story has the most alcohol of any I remember. I mean, the alcohol's always there. I think it's just normally implied. Well, we've obviously gone a little bit late, which I assumed we'd do, but there were so many stories about the devil around Christmas Eve, or in the 12 nights of Christmas, or the 12 days of Christmas, depending on how you know them, that I just felt compelled to collect as many as I could find here tonight. Next week will be our last show for December. I take the last week of December off. I haven't quite decided. I'm sort of flush with choices. I haven't quite decided what I want to do with it. But you can bet that it will be more sort of strange, superstitious lore around the winter season and Christmas. Gia says those men were rough fellows. Yeah. The question I have for you, though, to consider out there is, who was the devil? Was it Hollander? Or was it the gunner who kicked them up in such a way? Because I kind of think it's the gunner. He noticed that they were arguing. I think he was in the room sort of tipping the cards in the favor of the Hollander, and he just wanted to make nasty chaos. But then he runs away, so I don't know. Maybe none of them are the devil. I think that's probably the point. But I do like the idea that one of them is. Well, Thursdays we do a ride-along stream, same time of night, 6:30. It's on Thursdays. If you like writing or you want to sort of participate in creating silly little flash fiction stories, come join us for the Varietal Show, Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, whatever that translates to for you, PST over here. These have been sort of tales from German and Nordic folklore. Norwegian rather, not just Nordic, about the devil on Christmas Eve. Remember, keep your windows shut during the 12 nights of Christmas. And of course, if a dog should get in by your fireplace, no matter how much it howls, don't hurt it, or Frau Gauden will get you. GS says, creates the paranoia with your drinking buddies. Yeah, I think that is sort of the point. He is the one who creates the chaos. I'll keep the fire warm for you. I'll keep the fire warm for you. You have yourself a good sleep.